My grandfather left me his entire estate, but my parents secretly gave it all to my younger brother. When I found out, they acted like it was no big deal. So I started planning to take everything back. When my grandfather passed away, I lost the only person in my family who truly saw me. He wasn't perfect, stubborn, old school, too blunt for his own good, but he believed in me. More than that, he respected me. I was the only one in the family who visited him regularly, who helped him pay bills when tech got too confusing, who actually listened when he rambled about the past. In return, he gave me what I never got from anyone else in our household: validation. He used to tell me I was sharp, steady, and built for storms. He used to say my brother was all flash and no spine. So when I found out Grandpa had left me everything, his savings, his house, and a few investments, I wasn't surprised. We were close, and he told me plainly during his last hospital stay, "You'll know what to do with it. They won't." I was 26 when he passed. My younger brother Jake was 24 and already on his second failed business attempt. My parents had always cleaned up after him, no matter how messy it got. When he crashed their car during a drunken joyride, they blamed the friend in the passenger seat. When he failed out of college, they claimed the professors had a vendetta. Meanwhile, I was the one with 2 jobs and a master's degree, still paying off my own student loans because they said, "We can't afford help right now." It was always like that. I was the responsible one, so they treated me like I didn't need anything. Jake was the fragile genius, charming, impulsive, allergic to consequences, and they threw every resource they had at him, even when he burned through them like gasoline. Still, when Grandpa died, I didn't expect what happened next. They offered to handle the legal stuff, said probate was stressful, and since I was still working full-time and planning to relocate, they'd make things easier by taking care of the logistics. "It's just paperwork," my dad said. "We'll keep you updated." I trusted them. That was my first mistake. The second came a year later when I tried to buy a house and learned I couldn't access any of the inheritance. Not the savings, not the modest rental property my grandfather had owned, not even the investment accounts he'd mentioned. I called my mom in a panic, thinking something had gone wrong with the bank. She was quiet. Then she said, "We didn't think you'd mind. Jake needed the money more." I don't remember what I said next. I remember silence. My hands were shaking. I remember her voice, calm, casual, like she was telling me they ate the last slice of cake. "Your brother needed help with his startup. You know how hard he's been working. He just needed a boost." I asked her if she knew Grandpa's will left everything to me. Another pause. Then, "Well, you always had a good job, and Jake, he's always struggled. You know that. We were just trying to keep the family afloat." I couldn't breathe. They stole from me. There's no other way to put it. They took what was legally and ethically mine and handed it over to the one person who had burned through every second chance he'd ever been given. And they didn't even ask. They didn't apologize. They didn't explain. They just acted like I was being selfish for not understanding the bigger picture. That was the moment I knew. If I didn't stand up for myself, no one ever would. So I didn't yell, I didn't argue, I got quiet, I got smart, and I started planning. They thought I'd walk away empty-handed. They were wrong. Update 1. You don't grow up in a house like mine without learning to lower your expectations early. My parents didn't scream or hit. They weren't monsters. They were just cold in that quiet, polite way that doesn't get noticed outside the house. Jake got the warmth, the attention, the praise. I got management, schedules, lists, feedback. When I brought home straight A's, they nodded and said, "Good, keep it up." When Jake got a B, they celebrated like he'd won the Nobel Prize. I learned quickly that love in our house was conditional, and that those conditions didn't apply equally. Jake was always the center of the universe. He was the creative one, the sensitive one, the one who needed more support. I was the one who handled her own dentist appointments by age, the one who packed her own lunch and never forgot a permission slip. Because I didn't need help, I didn't deserve it. At least, that's how it always felt. I stopped trying to impress them by the time I hit high school. I got into a top university on my own merit and graduated early. They didn't show up to the ceremony. Jake missed his midterms 1 year because he forgot the dates, and my parents flew across the country to argue with his professors. So no, I wasn't shocked that they chose him over me again. What shocked me was that they felt entitled to my inheritance, like it was their sacrifice to redistribute, like Grandpa's money was just another family resource they could reallocate to support Jake's growth. They didn't just betray me, they expected me to understand. I moved forward carefully. The first thing I did was contact Grandpa's old lawyer. He remembered me immediately, said I was the only grandkid who ever sent a thank you card. When I told him what had happened, his tone changed. "That's not what he intended," he said flatly. "Not even close." Turns out, Grandpa's will was incredibly specific. Everything was supposed to be held in a revocable trust, with me as the sole beneficiary. The house, the savings account, even a vintage car in storage. The lawyer had drafted everything properly and submitted it to my parents, who were listed as the co-trustees only for convenience while I relocated across state lines. That trust was never meant to be liquidated or distributed until I signed off. But the paperwork told a different story. My parents had quietly closed accounts, sold the rental property, and consolidated funds in a new joint account. Then they transferred it to Jake over time, labeling it as investment support or early family distribution. Every step of the way, they signed as trustees, claiming they had verbal permission from me, which of course, they never had. The lawyer was horrified. "Do you want to take legal action?" he asked. "Because we have a strong case." I told him I'd think about it. But honestly, I didn't know what I wanted. I was angry. But more than that, I was tired. Tired of being the one who always had to take the high road. Tired of swallowing betrayal because it's family. Tired of feeling like my pain only mattered if it was convenient for other people. So I sat with it for a while. I watched Jake flaunt his entrepreneurial lifestyle on Instagram. Fake deep quotes, espresso shots, rented cars passed off as his own. I watched my parents repost his interviews and shower him with praise. They acted like he was a self-made genius. Like the $300K that came from my inheritance wasn't a factor in his sudden rise. He wasn't even successful. His business wasn't profitable. I talked to a few former employees who said checks bounced. One guy said Jake promised him a management position, then ghosted him after 6 months. He was good at spinning dreams, but none of them were real. And that's when it clicked. I didn't want to sue. I wanted something more permanent. I wanted to dismantle the illusion. So I started digging. I went through public records, traced business licenses, corporate filings, and employee complaints. I created a spreadsheet of everything Jake had touched in the last 5 years. I found loan applications with inconsistencies, discrepancies in tax filings, a few consultants he listed on paper who never existed. I reached out to a freelance investigative journalist I'd met through work once, someone who specialized in small business fraud and shady tech startups. I sent her everything, anonymously, through a burner email. She didn't take long. Within 3 weeks, she published a piece titled "Silicon Snake Oil: The Startup Bros Who Sell More Hype Than Product." Jake was featured in the second paragraph. No names, just enough detail to make it obvious to anyone in our circle. The fallout started quietly. A few investors pulled out. Jake posted a vague Instagram story about haters and jealous people. My parents called me, panicked, asking if I'd seen the article. I played dumb, but I wasn't done. While the press took its toll, I went back to the lawyer. We filed an official claim of breach of fiduciary duty against my parents, citing misuse of trust assets, violation of trustee obligations, and outright fraud. Because the original trust paperwork was clear, and my signature was never given, the claim was valid. The estate wasn't huge, but it was enough, and now it was going to court. My parents tried to guilt me. "We thought you'd understand," my mother said. "You always said Jake needed more help." I laughed. "You mean he needed my money?" They didn't see it that way. They never did. Update 2. If you've never sued your own parents, let me tell you, it doesn't feel good. It feels necessary. It feels like finally picking up the knife they've been cutting you with for years and saying, "No more." The day the court papers were served, my mom called sobbing. I didn't answer. My dad sent me an email full of lawyer speak and zero accountability. "You're blowing this out of proportion. We were acting in the family's best interest. Jake needed the money more than you did." That one stuck with me. Needed it more. As if I didn't need the stability, the safety net, the generational wealth I was promised, as if I hadn't earned it just by being the one Grandpa trusted. They assumed I wouldn't fight back because I never had before, because I was too quiet, too mature, too forgiving. They were wrong. The case took months to build. But we had them, in writing. My parents had signed documents stating they were acting with my consent when liquidating parts of the trust. There were no emails, no calls, no texts from me authorizing it, because I never did. They used their status as co-trustees to access the funds, assuming no one would check, but I checked. And now so did the court. I'll never forget the look on Jake's face when he had to show up to testify. He walked in like a CEO. Expensive jacket, polished shoes, phone in hand, pretending not to notice me in the back row. But when he sat down and the lawyer began reading out the misuse of funds, his entire posture changed. They listed the money, my money, spent on marketing, consulting, and travel. Vacations, equipment. A luxury co-working space he used mostly for Instagram photos. Then came the tax documents. I had anonymously tipped off the IRS 6 months earlier with everything I'd found. They opened an investigation and found irregularities. While that's still ongoing and out of my hands, the court took notice. By the time the second hearing rolled around, Jake's last investor had pulled out. His startup website went offline. A few articles quietly removed his name from press releases. And still, my parents stood by him. They sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, whispering, glaring, refusing to look at me directly. My mother submitted a character statement saying she was disappointed in how I was handling things. "This is tearing our family apart," she wrote. Not once did she say why the family was in pieces to begin with. I stayed silent, let the documents speak, let the receipts scream. By the end of the hearings, the court ruled in my favor. Full restitution, immediate return of remaining assets, legal fees paid by them. My parents looked stunned, like the universe had suddenly flipped upside down. They hadn't just lost the case, they'd lost control. "Jake?" He stormed out, literally slammed the door behind him. Later that week, he posted on LinkedIn about stepping away from entrepreneurship to pursue passion projects. I almost laughed. One of his old business partners shared the post with a sarcastic comment, translation, "Investors pulled the plug." The vintage car that had been sitting in storage, I sold it. Used the money to pay off the rest of my student loans. The house Grandpa left me, I moved into it. It was old, creaky, and smelled like memories. But it was mine. I changed the locks, repainted the walls, cleaned out the attic, and found a letter Grandpa wrote me years ago and must have forgotten to send. It said, "If you're reading this, I probably kicked the bucket. Sorry about that. I just want you to know, you were always the one I trusted, the one with backbone. Don't let anyone convince you that you owe them your life. Build your own." I cried reading it. Not because I was sad, but because for the first time in my life, someone in my family chose me. Jake's financial collapse happened gradually, then all at once. When the funding dried up, he tried pivoting, offering consulting services, launching an online course, but his name was poisoned now. Too many burned bridges, too many whispers. The journalist who first exposed him did a follow-up piece called "When Startups Lie, The Long Fallout." She didn't mention him directly, but again, everyone knew. He moved out of his apartment and back in with my parents. They sold their car to help pay his legal bills. And through all of it, I said nothing, didn't gloat, didn't rub it in, just lived my life. Quiet, content, free. One day, I ran into an old neighbor who used to babysit Jake and me. She said, "I heard what happened. Your mom tells everyone you sued the family out of spite." I smiled. "That's one way to tell it." She gave me a look. "Good for you. They never appreciated you. We all saw it." I didn't realize how many people had seen it, how obvious it was to outsiders, even if I spent years gaslighting myself into believing I was imagining it. Now I know better. My parents haven't spoken to me since the court ruling. Not one word. No holiday cards. No apologies. They're still clinging to their narrative that I'm ungrateful, cold, calculating. Let them. I don't need their approval anymore. I don't need to explain. They gambled with my future and lost, and I took it back. Update 3. 2 months after the court ruling, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Just my name handwritten in my mother's looping cursive. I knew what it was before I even opened it. Still, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the envelope for an hour. Part of me wondered if it would be an apology. A real one. Not one of those sorry you feel that way guilt trips dressed as reconciliation. A part of me wanted it to be something different, something human. It wasn't. Inside were 3 pages, front and back, of emotional manipulation. My mother wrote that she and my father were shocked and heartbroken, that I could be so cold and litigious toward my own family, that I had humiliated Jake publicly and killed any chance of reconciliation. She said they were disappointed that I would drag personal matters into the court system, instead of handling it like family. Nowhere in the letter was the word sorry. Not for the stolen inheritance. Not for the betrayal. Not for choosing Jake over me again and again. Instead, she framed everything as my decision to sever ties, as if I'd set the fire, not simply refused to sit in it anymore. There was one line that stuck with me, though. She wrote, "You got the money. Isn't that enough? Why are you still so angry?" I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was just done. Done being the afterthought. Done being the capable one they could guilt into silence. Done pretending that peace meant staying quiet while I got picked clean. They thought I wanted revenge, but I didn't. I wanted dignity, autonomy, respect. The money was symbolic, yes, but it was never about the amount. It was about what it represented. The fact that the one person who saw my worth had left me something real, and my parents still couldn't let me have it without strings. After the letter, I got one more call. From Jake. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was brittle, not angry this time, just tired. He said, "I know you probably don't want to talk to me, and I get it, but I didn't mean for things to go like this. I thought we were a team." That line almost made me laugh. A team? Jake and I were never teammates. We were rivals in a game I didn't even want to play. He got endless second chances. I got handed his cleanup duty. He got defense. I got silence. I didn't return the call. Not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I'd spent 30 years begging for crumbs from people who never intended to feed me. I finally had a seat at my own table. I wasn't leaving it to ask for theirs. Since then, my life has been quiet. I renovated Grandpa's house, repainted every room, turned the office into a little reading nook, just like he used to have. Adopted a cat, planted herbs in the backyard. I host dinner for friends once a week, and no one has to perform or apologize for being themselves. Sometimes I sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and wonder if they miss me, if they regret what they did, but I don't dwell on it. They made their choices, so did I. And if they ever send another letter asking me to forgive them, to come home, to move on, they'll get the same answer I've learned to give to every lie dressed as love. No. Update 4. Last month I took a drive out to the cemetery. It was early, just after dawn. The roads were still empty, bathed in that cool, silvery light that makes everything look softer, quieter. I brought a thermos of coffee and 2 mugs, a silly ritual I started when Grandpa got sick. He never liked drinking alone, even in silence. The cemetery was empty when I arrived, just the wind in the trees and the sound of my boots crunching over gravel and wet leaves. I made my way to his headstone, a simple piece of gray granite with his name, his war medals, and the quote he always used to say, "Build your own." I sat on the little wooden bench next to it, poured 2 cups of coffee, and set one beside the stone. "I finally did it," I said aloud. I took it back, all of it. I told him everything. It felt strange at first, talking out loud like I was narrating a story to a ghost, but after a while it felt natural. I talked about the court case, the panic in my mom's voice when they realized I wasn't bluffing, and the complete and total collapse of Jake's startup empire. How quickly investors drop you when they realize your resume is mostly smoke and mirrors. I told him about how Mom had the audacity to say, "Isn't the money enough?" Like the money was the point. Like I hadn't been mourning something deeper. Years of being overlooked, undervalued, silenced. Like dignity could be bought. I told him about the letter she wrote, 3 pages of carefully crafted guilt, emotional manipulation posing as grace. Not one word of ownership, not one line of real remorse, just reassignments of blame, a rewriting of history where I was the villain who tore the family apart, as if there was ever anything holding it together besides obligation. And Jake? I told him about Jake too, about the voicemail, the quiet voice, the claim that we were a team. I didn't even know what to do with that. It was so absurd. We were never teammates. We weren't even friends. We were strangers raised under the same roof, with wildly different rulebooks. He was never punished. I was never praised. I didn't return his call. I told Grandpa I wasn't angry anymore. Just done. Then I pulled out a folded slip of paper I'd kept in my wallet. The last note Grandpa wrote me, the one I'd found tucked between old tax folders in a dusty box in his attic. If you're reading this, I probably kicked the bucket. Sorry about that. I just want you to know, you were always the one I trusted. The one with backbone. Don't let anyone convince you that you owe them your life. Build your own. I left it tucked under the bouquet I brought, white lilies and rosemary, for remembrance. And then I drove home. In the weeks that followed, something shifted. Not in my parents, they've remained stubbornly silent, but in me. I stopped checking my email waiting for a reply. I stopped replaying arguments in my head, wondering if I should have said something differently, more forcefully, more gently. I stopped explaining myself to people who didn't care to understand. There's a strange freedom in being erased from someone else's narrative. At first, it stings. You realize how disposable you were. But then you start to see the gift in it. When people stop trying to control how you're seen, you get to decide for yourself. I made the house my own, refinished the wood floors, painted the walls sage green and warm cream, turned Grandpa's study into a quiet reading nook, bought a hammock for the backyard, and spent Saturday mornings lying in it with a book and a lazy cat named Basil purring on my chest. I even planted a garden. Tomatoes, peppers, basil, thyme. The rosemary's doing well, fitting, I guess. I see friends more, people I love and who love me back without conditions. We cook together, laugh, tell stories about our weird families and the ones we've built on our own terms. No one plays the golden child. No one plays the scapegoat. We just are. I haven't spoken to my parents in almost a year now. They haven't reached out again. No apology, no attempt at reconciliation. I think they believe I'll come crawling back eventually, like a prodigal daughter begging for scraps. But I've learned something they haven't. Sometimes, no closure is closure. Sometimes, you just walk away from the door they slammed shut and build a new one somewhere better. I've taken their silence as permission to fully let go. To stop trying to win back a love I was never going to get in the first place. Instead, I did something else. Last week, I set up a small educational fund in Grandpa's name. It's not flashy, just a modest scholarship for first-generation college students who want to study law or business. The kind of kids like me who did everything right and still got overlooked. The first recipient is a girl from a single-parent household who wants to become a lawyer and help immigrants navigate family law. She wrote in her essay, "I want to give people the kind of fairness I never had." I read it twice, then I cried. And I knew in my bones that this was what Grandpa meant when he said build your own. It wasn't about money, it wasn't about revenge, it was about legacy. Real legacy. I may have lost my parents, I may have lost my brother, but I found something bigger than all of that. I found peace, and it's quiet, and it's warm. And it doesn't ask me to shrink to fit inside someone else's comfort. I don't know if I'll ever hear from them again. And honestly, I don't need to. If they ever write again, if another envelope shows up in my mailbox with my mother's careful script, I'll do what I've learned to do with things that hurt, but no longer hold power. I'll set it aside, pour myself a cup of coffee, step into the garden, and move forward. Because the truth is, I never really wanted to destroy them. I just needed to save myself.